Following on from my Ghost Town video that I made a couple of days ago for Halloween 2018, I thought I'd show you a few of the more unusual instruments that I used on that record. Somebody asked me for a making of. Basically, it's very similar to what I did with the other tunes, but I thought I'd show you these new instruments instead as a sort of as an add-on. So I've done a couple of videos on my channel where I've recorded the entire thing and described the exact process of recording, and you can see those to subscribe for future content. So the first thing is this sort of spaceship shaped thing. What is it? Well, it's a theremin, but it's the latest sort of Moog music digital emulation of a theremin. The whole thing is 100 years old, the whole concept of a theremin, and it's futuristic now as it was in 1919. So what we have is two antennae here. We've got a pitch one here and the volume one here. So if I lift my hand away, you hear the sound from the instrument. I don't have to touch the antenna at all. When you walk away from the theremin, just put a lead over it and it grounds itself. So this one does the pitch like that. When you have a theremin and you set it up, you need to set it up now. At this stage, I would recommend that you go and look at people that really can play this thing. Carolina Ake, for example, from Germany, she is a fantastic thereminist. And she does Skype lessons as well, where she's developed things like finger positions for getting the notes exactly right. Thomas Grillo from the US does a similar thing, where he gives you a sort of guide to playing the theremin. And there are lots of other thereminists, but really no trip to YouTube on the theremin would be complete without looking at Clara Rockmore. Now, she was essentially the thereminist of the 20th century, who played all sorts of music. Her sister always accompanied her on the piano. So when you set this thing up, you want the lowest note to be just behind you. So I'm now stood at the right distance from the theremin, which means that my hand position, I can get an octave from a clenched fist to open fingers, but keeping my thumb and forefinger together. And then trying to get the diatonic tones in between by having subtle finger movements. So my Ghost Town contribution on this was this. Too much fighting on the dance floor. Now I had to do that a few times to get the pitch right. You've also got to stand stock still. Even the slightest movement of your entire body will throw the entire pitch field out. It's basically a string, like from the lowest note to the highest note. Like that. You can set the range of this as well. I think I've got this quite a high range, but it just means I can concentrate. I just tried it a few times and I was lucky to get it right on the 4th or 5th go. So there's the theremin. Now it's got all sorts of other things on it. For example, there's, this one has got like a delay built in, like an echo, which is quite nice. It's also got lots of different sounds. There's all sorts of things that you can do with this. So the other thing that I used was this. This is the Akai EWI, the USB. It's the latest in a line of electronic wind instruments. Now the idea of this is that these pads are like the keys on a clarinet or a flute or an oboe or whatever wind instrument it happens to be. So for example, this is set to flute fingering at the moment. So my acoustic flute here basically the keys do the same on that as they do on this, but the difficult bit of this of course is getting the embouchure right, it's getting your tone right, your posture right. There's all sorts of things that you have to get right in order that this thing doesn't sound awful like it did just then. semitone's a bit harsh there. I'm a beginner on this as well. Now, lots of people say to me, look, Dan, why don't you just play instruments you can play? And of course, there's quite a lot in that. However, I feel that the best way to develop as a musician is to constantly put yourself back at the bottom so that you can learn, and it makes you a better musician on those instruments that you play professionally. I think it's really important, for me at any rate. Now, the flute, to getting upper octaves, you've got to change your embouchure and change the angle at which you blow across the sound hole. And there's all sorts of different finger combinations to get the higher notes. It's really hard. On this, however, you get a set of octave rollers here. So I can play the same note on here, but getting 4 octave range, which is massive. It's huge. Earlier versions of the EWI had a 7 octave range, but this is more than enough. And so I played the main line on that, where I had to actually change the octave roller to get the so it's timing that. Now you have like a pitch bend thing with this as well. You can chew the mouthpiece more for modulation or vibrato. You can also do a pitch bend with this hand, but I've disabled it because I just found I was slipping and it was just being a bit of a nuisance. But you can switch all that in software. So you can also, with this, it's got aftertouch, which the more upmarket keyboards will have, where you play a note at a particular volume, but you can also apply pressure after playing that note to vary the dynamics. Pretty nifty thing. It also means if you're learning flute, for example, you can get really proficient with the fingering on here and then sort of go back to the flute to do your embouchure, and so you can play with several steps at once. You can set the fingering on this to oboe. There's also a generic EWI one, which is sort of just like a combination of those things, which you set on software. And the sound that you're hearing is coming from the computer, not this. Early EWIs had like massive battery compartments and with onboard sounds, so that you could literally just have a jack output of your from the bottom of this. But this is just a standard USB plug. So this, in addition to the sort of bizarre Frankenstein creations that I come up with, such as this, the Panjo, you can see this on my channel as well. I use this with an E-bow, and then just plug it in here like that. So I basically tried to incorporate these sort of weird instruments where you can get all these sort of completely different sounds. If you listen to the original of Ghost Town, of course you got the trombone where you can get those pitch bends. You can't get that out of a guitar to the same sort of accuracy and the same sort of control, or a keyboard or anything like that, unless it's got a pitch wheel on it. So here are my more unusual instruments, which I own, even though I can't really play them. I like being at the bottom and starting again and trying to find out how an instrument works, because I think it makes things better with your other instruments. It makes you think differently, and also you're just constantly concentrating on trying to get a result. So there we are. There they are from Ghost Town.